particular sort of rituals beloved of anthropologists and so on. So I hunted through the market for something that was as far away from that definition of an African textile that I could find. I didn't know Kiswahili at that time. I don't know a lot now. But I bought this. And it was printed in India. And it just had sort of something a bit more like a Damien Hirst spot painting on it. And then I went back to my friend George in Gungulu, who I was working with, and I said, George, what does Sujuikitu mean? He said, you know nothing. I said, I know nothing, but what does Sujuikitu? It means you know nothing in Kiswahili. The next day we drove out to Bagamoyo, and there was a woman wearing an ensemble of Sujuikitu. They come in pairs, Kangas. And from, I think probably before that, but certainly from that point on, Sujuikitu has been a kind of a watch phrase for me. Because if you know nothing, you can begin to learn something. If you think you know everything, you'll never learn anything. You know? So Lalela, I'm listening, but I'm looking as well. You know? And those things are important. Then I kind of worked my way south, and I did a project with, or worked with an amazing project in Mozambique, in Maputo, with Bishop Sengolane and the artists called Swords into Plowshares, where all those guns that were left in Mozambique after the Civil War, the bishop invited people to bring them in and exchange them for more useful hardware. But that was interesting in itself, working with the people who were giving in these arms. But what was very striking about it was not so much that they were getting useful hardware like bikes and roofing materials and hose and literally, but that they were liberated from the guns that they had with them. And I knew nothing really about the story of Mozambique, about this project. And one particular sculpture that I saw actually just over the river, the Oxo Tower, led me into that. And that became really kind of a big part of my life. Going to Mozambique, my experience of South Africa was a transit lounge in Oliver Tambo Airport, upholstered in imitation mudcloth from Mali, the chairs. That was my sole understanding of South Africa, except of course by this time I'd started to work with June on the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade. So I knew global South Africans, and I began to know some artists as well. And then I went to the bag factory in Joburg, that extraordinary place where black South African artists, you know, continued to practice during the apartheid regime. I went to Carol Nell's extraordinary studio, which is sort of the other end of the spectrum in Rivonia, Moudif. And I met a lot of artists, and I wrote a book called Angaza Africa. And I began to learn a little bit more about South Africa. And then I worked with June on the South Africa landscape. And we both felt, we went to this wonderful British Museum meeting where these hatchet-faced people, a large number of them, were sitting around the table. They invited me to come in at the last moment because they believed fondly that they could just peel a strip of the fynbos off of South Africa and drop it down in front of the British Museum and that would be fine. But June and I knew that people had to come into this landscape because that's what it's all about. So that was an amazing learning curve, and I met John, Eugene, and since then I've written about that a lot because it represented to me something that people are writing about a bit more nowadays, which is intangible as opposed to kind of tangible heritage, and that is very, very important. And it's actually quite difficult for a museum to get some of those ideas across. I'll stop there. And I'm just going to soak it up. I'm going to juik it.
Chris, sorry to interject.